So welcome to the final demo video for the Searchworks indexing and performance work cycle. I'm Christina, Harlow. I'm the product owner. This is our Sprint7, our final sprint of the work cycle demo. Before we jump into it, I will go ahead and introduce the team that's been involved in this from the beginning. So we have Chris Beer as our software engineer and our technical lead. We have Jessie, Keck, Jack Reed, Camille Villa, Drew Winget, and Shelley Doljack as our software engineers. Sarah Seestone and Alissa Hafele have been key stakeholders and very active in this work cycle, so very happy to have them in it. I've been product owner, Jennifer Vine, and when needed, Gary Geisler have been involved as UX designers. Stu is our DLSS direct liaison, Stu Snydman, and Kam Chan has been here as our ops liaison. If you're curious to see, and I'll put this in the comments below the video, our communication artifacts from the work cycle, we do have a YouTube playlist with all of, this will be our 8th demo, I believe, so all of our videos are on that YouTube playlist. We do have a Google Drive Docs folder where we'll leave stuff that's very much work in progress documentation, so some of it might not make sense or be up to date, but it is all left there in case people want to see it. I know that the DevOps docs on Searchworks indexing are actively being updated. That should be a good place to pointer to all the code bases and operations resources that were updated in this work cycle. We will have the Searchworks indexing Slack channel remain up. Let me actually fix that. Remain up if such questions come up or we still want to use it. And there is, this will probably revert to being the Access Team overall project board across GitHub projects, but that project board still remains up. So those are all the communication artifacts, as well as any, you can email anyone who is involved in the team to figure out if there are any questions. So for today's work cycle, or for today's demo, we're going to start by going into a demo or review of work we have done in the last sprint, which is the last week, this final week. And then after that, we're going to go back to the original goals as set out in our kickoff deck and see what we achieved overall throughout this work cycle. So at that point, I'm going to see Jessie, are you ready to talk about this past sprint's work on Searchworks status?
Yep.
Cool. And you're going to share your screen?
Yeah, it says I can't until you stop sharing.
There we are.
All right.
Just checking.
Cool. So can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
And you're seeing the Searchworks status dashboard?
Yep.
Perfect. We've been continuing some of the work on the dashboard that I have up here. We've demoed some of our progress through the last couple of sprints, but just really quickly for those who haven't seen those videos, we kind of have this overall dashboard with all of the different references to the services. I believe this is something that may have been new that was added this sprint, which was a Twitter feed that is specifically for the Searchworks status. So this will allow us to kind of tweet out known outages or incidences. So we'll be able to kind of have some sort of message that we're able to put into this board nicely here with a Twitter feed, and as well as the graphs below, which as I've mentioned, we've shown. The main thing that we kind of were working on this sprint was this overall status that you can see at the top with this big green check because everything is going wonderfully. But what I'd like to do is kind of demo some of the logic that we've built into this and kind of the different states that you might see. So I'm actually going to be kind of like faking. I'm showing a local version of this. This is deployed out right now. But I'm just showing a local version so that I can fake taking down certain services. So we've added the notion of kind of a fatal outage versus just an outage. So by that, I mean, if you can't get to the Searchworks homepage, that's a fatal outage. If for some reason you were, like the Searchworks homepage was up, but we were able to determine that both of our searching APIs, our searching endpoints, which is our local solar index and the EBSCO EDS articles database. If for some reason both of those were down, that would also be considered a fatal outage. But for instance, if the Searchworks homepage was up and you could search the catalog, but maybe EBSCO was having an outage, we would still notify that up here. but it wouldn't necessarily be considered a fatal outage. Right now, because we haven't done much in the messaging, the difference between a fatal and a non-fatal outage is pretty subtle, but I'll show them to you now. So say, for instance, if we were to say you couldn't get to the Searchworks homepage. So you can see here we've got a red circle on the Searchworks website, and we have this messaging saying that Searchworks is experiencing a complete outage. All the wording is pretty easily configurable in our code base. So these are just kind of placeholder wording right now, and many of this is most likely subject to change. So let's say I bring the Searchworks website back up and everything is hunky-dory again. But let's say the EBSCO API goes down. So this means that you can't do any article searching. Again, we have the same icon, but what you can see here is our messaging is slightly different. So we don't say that we are having a complete outage at the time. However, if for some reason, say for instance, as I mentioned earlier, let's say the homepage was somehow up, but both the index and the article service was not, that would again fall back into this kind of fatal state, so that you can see, again, we're saying complete outage here. So we have some logic and the ability to modify this and configure this a bit to define when we're having some sort of outage that's considered actually a critical fatal outage, or if it's something that part of the application will still be available. And just to kind of show other things that this overall status will do is if, say, for instance, something that we might consider, at least for the Searchworks status board, a non-critical service. So say, for instance, we accidentally broke the request service, or the request service was down for some reason. So as you can see, we're saying that the request service is unavailable. It has this red circle, but that bubbles up into just being an issue as the global status. So we're not saying Searchworks is down, we're having a critical outage, but we do indicate that there is an issue with us or a related service, and that you can find out more information. Again, the wording is all kind of subject to change. And then just kind of to show kind of one other thing, I've only shown outages right now, but similarly, if say, like we noticed that the Searchworks Solar index was returning slowly. And actually, I'm going to say this with a caveat, is that we don't really have the way to differentiate between an issue and an outage right now, and that's a topic that we have for these upcoming sprints. Is one of the issues in our board is trying to determine what that means. But if I'm going to simulate that we actually understand that, and we could say maybe like the solar index was slow, that could bubble up to an issue at the top level service as well as if we were to similarly have some sort of way of determining whether there was a service, not necessarily outage, but some sort of slowness or some sort of degraded service, how we would show that. And so again, let's say a non-critical service like the library hours website, the library hours API, again, it's gonna not bubble up into anything critical, but we'll say that there's an outage and to look below. I think that's all that we've done for the status dashboard this week.
Great, thank you. And we'll talk more about how we're going to hand that off as a work product to the next work cycle at the end of this. Next, I believe we have Chris in talking about the move to solar. Do you want to share your screen?
Nothing to share.
Okay, so I'm going to just go back to the default then. Okay.
So in the last week, we've done some work to wire up and start monitoring the indexing work that the team's accomplished over the last 8 weeks or so. And what that means now is we're using our new mods indexing code in production today. Index content out of SDR into our Searchworks production indexes. Very soon, we're going to start using our Traject indexing pipeline for our MARC data. The team's made a lot of progress trying to wire that up and put it on scheduled tasks so it runs regularly, just like it does today, with hourly, nightly updates. And one thing new we're going to do is start trying to do monthly full updates in an entirely automated fashion. Today it takes a lot of hand-holding to get new index into production, but we think we've been able to completely automate it and take a lot of that effort away, which is going to be great and free the team up to do other tasks. A couple other things I'll mention. In addition to automating these for our Searchworks production index, we're also automating in exactly the same way for the Morrison preview index, the Morrison index and the preview indexes that we generate. So they'll ideally be kept completely up to date and should be more similar now than they were before. And a final bit of work that we'll be doing in the next week or two is starting to decommission some of the services we're no longer using. And that includes the old mods indexing code, the service called Discovery Dispatcher that was kind of proxying a lot of updates from SDR to Searchworks, because we have an alternative way of doing that now that's quite a bit more performant and allows us to index at a faster rate. And also decommissioning some of the Searchworks Solar nodes that we're no longer using.
Great, okay. And with that, I'm going to move into just a overall sprint wrap-up. Broke these out as slides for no particular reason than it's easier to compare where we started with our goals and where we ended, and to go through and give some details of each one of those so we all understand exactly what we accomplished in the last 8 weeks, finishing or leading up to our planning for the next work cycle tomorrow morning. So this was our original in-out scope and undefined. This is in our original kickoff. I just broke this out per slide, but you can see here, like overall, we did pretty dang well. So going through that, what did we get done? We got indexing performance of MARC data. This is going from Symphony to our Searchworks index. We had projected that we wanted to try to get this done within quote unquote 1 business day, like within 5 hours so you could see errors. We well surpassed that. So it went from originally something greater than 15 hours to where we could do it in 3 to 4 hours end to end now with all the additional steps we've got to process. So that's a huge win here. And then for partial updates where we have a certain subset of records going through, we've gotten to where we can do about 50,000 records a minute, which is also blowing away the original projection of what we wanted. So that's a huge success. For mods, and I put mods asterisk, this is coming from Stanford Digital Repository, so it's mods plus. But with that in mind, we originally wanted to try to get 1.6 million DOR records in about 2 hours and about 10,000 records in under 5 minutes. We didn't get there, but we got close, and a lot of it is no longer the indexing code itself, but figuring out how we can better interact with the XML we're pulling from SDR. So there are more involved issues there. But it used to be about 2.5 records a second was the indexing speed. We are closer currently with about 4 records a second, and if we get some upstream work done that we had around JRuby, which we actually did a lot of demos on some of the issues we were having with it, if we can get that, we can probably move up to 6 records a second. So there's a a continued update path there. We wanted to evaluate and act on moving Searchworks index to Solar Cloud. This is a clustered Solar approach instead of having our single Searchworks Solar instance. We did that. It's on Solar now, which is our shared department-wide instance of Solar Cloud. And we wanted to evaluate moving Searchworks Solar to a modern Solar version. And we did that. We went from version 4 to version 7, the latest release of version 7, I believe, unless they released one in the last week, which we thought they might. And I would call out that it's not just that Searchworks Index got to a modern version of Solar, but everything on our Solar Cloud instance got to a modern version of Solar. So it's not just us, but it's all on Solar 7 now. We moved MARC and mods And course reserves, indexing pipelines to Traject. You heard we still are getting the MARC kickoff in place, the bash scripts, but all the pieces are there, and it's just making sure we do the right orchestration to get them in production. This was a huge win because it greatly simplified the code bases, and we hope it will make it easier to change things in the future whenever mapping logic comes through. We improved DOR indexing time, kind of. I'll give us a check for this, but it could always get better. But like I said before, DOR being Stanford Digital Repository, Digital Object Registry, we greatly improved it in the records per second, but there's a lot of questions about upstream code bases and how we can improve the interactions with SDR. And we've made it here so that we've simplified those connections, and a next step would have a much easier understanding of where to start in fixing it, or to continue improving how SDR gets its data out. We wanted to develop, simplify, and document a full Searchworks reindex process for all data sources. Before this, there was no inclination or no shared understanding that we actually could reindex all of Stanford Digital Repository without doing some really messy data hacks. We've done that. We can now reindex. It's all scripts we can run now, so that's great. We wanted to expose monitoring data to end users in some to-be-determined fashion. We didn't know what this end user monitoring data would look like originally. That has become Searchworks status. So we have the technical framework there, and what we're handing off to the next work cycle is to say, okay, figure out the marketing, figure out this is the framework. You can see how it's modular. If you need to add something, if you need to remove something, you need to change the wording. If it should be a green happy face instead of a green check, whatever it may be that would work, this is what we could figure out with the data sources we had available to serve such an application. We improved overall monitoring of Searchworks. This is always something that we can fix. But the reporting for end users, obviously, it's better. We have changed how we do reporting to our data control departments, and it seems like that has been relatively successful. So people are enjoying those reports more, which is great. And we've added a lot of monitoring and health checks, in part for serving the end user app, in part because we wanted to make sure that Searchworks was running when we were changing stuff. We automated the deployment of the indexing processes, or we're wrapping that up now, so that's just to make it a little bit easier to rerun. And we now have, this is something I actually am adding to our original goals. We now have a lightweight relevancy changes review process. So one of the reasons why Searchworks Index was so hard to update is because so many people were scared to touch it, uncertain how it would affect the end user and all of the tuning we have done. We now have a way to handle that. So that seems like a big win. And then for our next steps, we're obviously going into Searchworks application work cycle. We're hoping that application level performance tuning can be a follow-on there. We're hoping that we can hand off the Searchworks status application and say, okay, this is where we got from a technical framework. Now from an application or end user framework, does this work? How are you going to clean it up? How do you want to market it? How do we want to get it into a state where we could officially release it instead of having it just be something we know we can do technically? And then I would say we want to continue adding monitoring and improving monitoring and automating deployment of the indexing processes. And what I mean by these is we did a lot of this in this work cycle. The next steps are to think about how do we do real-time updates between the catalog and the index, because we're actually very close to where we could start working on that in a different arena. That's not going to happen in the Searchworks work cycle. That's a separate work cycle to be discussed and planned, but we are getting to where we can have better real-time updates. So that's all we have for our final work cycle demo. I appreciate everyone attending this and for the team and walking through everything we've done throughout the past 8-9 weeks. Stay tuned for the Searchworks application work cycle, which is coming up next. And if you have questions, you can always leave them in the comments below the video or find us on Slack or use one of the communication artifacts we listed out in the beginning.